you all to our next panel discussion on enabling Game 2.0 regulation, policy and governance. Requesting all to kindly have their seats. I welcome on stage our respected panelists for this session. Mr. Gaurav Arora from Jagran New Media. Ms. Gowree Gokhale from Nishith Desai Associates. Shri Rakesh Maheswari from MeitY. And to moderate this session, we would like to call upon Mr. Kazim Rizvi from the Dialogue. Over to Mr. Rizvi, please.
I hope I'm audible. Okay, great. Thank you to IAMAI for inviting us for this very important panel discussion on gaming regulation 2.0. My name is Kazim Rizvi. I'm the founding director of the Dialogue. It's great to be amongst a very distinguished panel today. Of course, Mr. Maheswari, who's with the Ministry of IT, Gowree Gokhale, who's a partner with Nishith Desai Associates, and Mr. Arora, who's with Jagran Media. We have around 45 minutes for the panel, so we'll have 3 rounds of discussion. First will be opening remarks, which will be around 3 to 4 minutes with respect to what the panelists think about the regulation, the draft proposed rules, which have of course been introduced on January the 2nd of this year, and which went through a robust consultative process. And we hopefully will see the notification and hopefully the way forward very soon. And the idea will be to discuss the draft rules with respect to various aspects. One, of course, will be the expectations from the industry. There are many things which have been proposed within the rules, which is one of them is independent SROs, then a lot of provisions for ensuring user safety and preventing harms. A lot of focus in terms of legitimizing the industry at large. Obviously, the government has come up with the definition of an online gaming intermediary, and it has also tried to sort of look at institutionalization of the entire industry in a way that the industry can grow, which of course will be important when we look at the overall aspect of Digital India, and also looking at how the industry can support jobs, economic growth, the growth of startups in the country, etc. So it's a sunrise sector, it's a very promising sector, and the rules which were proposed by the government earlier this year are a welcome step forward, a much needed step in fact, to give some legality to the industry, to legitimize the sector at large, and to promote innovation, to promote the growth of startups, etc. With that, I'd like to begin with Mr. Maheswari. Sir, good afternoon. Thank you for joining in today. We'd like to start with you, sir. What are your sort of thoughts in terms of the expectations you have? You have, of course, come up with the draft rules. Many organizations, including ours, organized consultation. There was an extensive period of discussions and a lot of inputs have come in. What next now? What is the expectation of the government as next steps?
Yeah, so thank you Rizvi ji, and thank you IAMAI to organize this particular session on online gaming. From a government standpoint of view, see, one of the major problems that we had is about the offshore gambling and sites, which maybe are not available on any of the recognized Play stores. But then, and probably pass bypass the whole taxation aspects. There are large number of grievances why it is a sunrise industry. As per the reports, in fact, crores, around 50 crore people who are using or who are playing games in one way or other, around 10 crores or maybe 8 crores of which are also involved in online real money gaming. The fact remains that there are many side channels which are available and through which these games are available. And sometimes because of the definitional issues, there is always a lot of confusion whether they are the games or gambling or betting or as soon as the money component is involved, and therefore it has been, the subject has been of quite, I should say, has been intensely debated in the parliament, particularly, I mean, from the private members' perspective. So many members have raised the queries. And because of the fact that it has the potential to generate a lot of revenue, to maybe generate a lot of employment opportunities in the country. Therefore, it is, at any given time now, it is of interest to the politicians as well. And it's primarily because of these reasons that the subject was taken up by Cabinet Secretary, by PMO also. An interministerial task force was constituted, and that too at the highest level. When we say the task force of secretaries, including from law, including from sports, including from consumer affairs, almost everybody was there. Finally, the report has been submitted, recommendations have been made, and in government what we have is an allocation of business rules by which each central government department or ministries really decided the business of a particular ministry is decided, and that's where for the Ministry of Electronics and IT, the online gaming as a subject has been allocated very recently on 28th of December to the Ministry of Electronics and IT, and in fact within 4 days. So that means we were more or less ready for this notification to happen, and on 2nd of January we have already published the draft gaming rules as part of intermediary due diligence, as part of intermediary guidelines and digital media ethics code 2021. So that means from ministry perspective, we are proactively engaged in seeing that there is some sort of a semblance in the whole industry. Some games which are not permitted are not allowed in the country. Those which are permitted should be allowed in a fair, transparent, responsible manner. There has to be accountability, and that's where a system has been thought of. In fact, the Honorable Minister himself has conducted at least 2 rounds of consultation once the draft was in publicly available. Of course, there were discussions with almost all kinds of stakeholders, even when we were discussing about the possible role and which ministry should be taking it up. So to that extent, more or less the job has been done, and given the way this ministry as of today is working and the keenness of our ministers, both the ministers, I am sure very shortly we should be able to come up with the new version of the IT intermediary guidelines and digital media ethics code, now covering the due diligence as is required for online gaming intermediaries and the associated ecosystem.
And we look forward to that, sir. In fact, I think you spoke about the opportunity, and the current market size is around $2.6 billion, and it's expected to grow to $8.6 billion in the next 5 years. And we are looking at more than 1 lakh jobs to be created in the coming years. So definitely a very upcoming and sunrise sector. And I think you spoke of important points, sir, in terms of, weeding out or prohibiting the offshore betting and gambling platforms. I think one of the key objectives which has been of the regulation is to make sure that legitimate online games of skill are provided the right amount of environment and ecosystem to flourish, and I think that has been done through the rules. Gowree, I'd like to sort of come to you in terms of the discussion, and as a lawyer, a couple of debates which we have been having is, number one, how do you differentiate between game of skill and game of chance? Right, and my sort of question to you, and of course you can respond to Mr. Maheswari's inputs as well, is to look at the differentiation between game of skill and game of chance, and how has that been tried to address in the rules, or what more needs to be done in terms to make sure that games of skill are registered by the SROs, and then there is no sort of prohibition by individual states to start blocking them. So what would be your take on that?
When I say that, if you see that lot of the if you really see in other sectors, the digital sectors, the Indian businesses were more of Me Too, right? If you see, lot of Indian native game formats have been developed. So kudos to the local Indian industry to sort of contribute in the innovation. Coming to your point, and that is the reason I mentioned that, because there is constant innovation. Where there is constant innovation and this constant determination of skill versus chance. Right now, traditionally, where did it come from? Because the state law, some of you may be aware, currently we are governed by state-specific laws, which gave exclusion to the skill gaming industry in terms of prohibition, anti-gambling prohibition. I'm trying to make it as simple as possible. But even the Supreme Court somewhere validated to say that game of skill, kosher, it's not gambling, protected business activity under Constitution. So that is the genesis. The problem with that is, because we traditionally always had game of skill only as an exclusion, there was no regulatory body under any state law to determine skill versus chance. It happened on a case-to-case basis, starting from rummy, then horse racing, then you have of course the fantasy. So the difficulty is that we only today have principles on the basis of which, as a lawyer, when somebody comes to me, because we are required to issue opinions today, right, for any business, not under law, but it is a good practice. Every time we have to really dig into whether those principles have been satisfied or not. So today, now if you see the rules, they don't specifically say skill versus chance. They basically say that the SRBs have to register games as per applicable laws, right? I mean, to put it very simply, the applicable law in India says skill gaming. That is where you will have a situation where SRBs will be sort of, it will be important for them to register only skill games. So there are two factors I feel that will help. One is there are a lot of AI-driven mechanics that the industry has discussed to determine whether a game is a game of skill or chance. So there are these stimulated bots that get created, right, basis which you are able to say skill bot versus unskill bot, semi-skill bot and all of that. Lot of statistical data is required to get generated. Even I see that before I sort of look at or satisfy to give an opinion. Secondly is a subjective test, right, which basically when you look at a game you get that internal feeling to say that this doesn't work, right? So how do you include that kind of gut feel subjective test in terms of a model for SRBs? That is where I feel, of course, some work has already been done in that regard, and I have also sort of as a team, we have given our inputs, but that is where, some work will need to be done on the subjective side, right? So I think these are the things which I feel, there is some work required for the industry.
Yeah, no, I'll come on that point because that's a very important point in terms of determining a model for games of skill, which can then be used for any upcoming game or a new format as well.
So that certainty is also required for the industry.
Yes. Because what we don't want is too much subjectivity in a test as well. I think it has to be objective, and I think one way could be that the Supreme Court has already given certain principles. If we can start from there, and maybe we can look at a quantitative model to add to that with respect to is skill being applied for more than 50% of that game. I mean, there are certain rules, and I think there's a lot of international research. Quantitative research is already being done, but I think that'll be interesting to look at. I'll come back to you, Mr. Maheswari, on that. But Mr. Gaurav, I want to come to you, and I think what Gowree was talking about, the role of Indian tech and the Indian startups. I think Jagran is one of those who have been involved and who have contributed to the development of the ecosystem. There are a lot of provisions for enhancing user safety. There is provisions for self-regulation, so it's industry friendly. As an industry, what are you sort of ready to now go ahead, implement the rules? What are your thoughts in terms of where we are and how far we need to go?
200%, so just to give you a perspective of what we do. We are a traditional legacy media organization, right? So gaming for us was an extension of the content that we were producing, right? At 100 million users, we already have quite a huge number of people who come to us. For us, the challenge is, how do we get them to engage more? How do we retain them, right? How do we give them more value? So gaming filled that void for us, because as an industry, there are, like Sir said, 500 million users, average 15 billion downloads, industry growing at 27% in terms of, the revenue that is happening. So for us, it is something that is waiting to be explored, right? And before us, we are not the game experts, to be honest, right? We are a content company to start with. We've diversified into gaming. So gaming's recent for us, about 1.5 to 2 years. But looking at, all the proposals that have been made, I think it's a very welcome move. It's a great, at least there's a framework, there's a body, there are guidelines to go by, right? So we all welcome. I think in between the draft that was presented and the iterations that have gone through, most of the things seem fairly viable and doable. Ecosystem credibility and user interest and safety are paramount, for anybody who's operating in this ecosystem or the domain. So we are with it, wholeheartedly supported. There might be few tweaks and changes that, that from a business perspective that have to be made. As long as those get adjusted, I think we'll be very happy to be a part of it.
Thank you, Mr. Arora. Mr. Maheswari, I'd like to come back to you and maybe sort of touch base a little bit on the SROs. I think this has been something which has been of great interest to us and generally in the industry as well. And one question I have, and this is a thought which I keep having, is we may have multiple SROs, right? And multiple SROs, maybe different formats, etc. How do we ensure that there is some sort of procedural and functional certainty with regard to the SRO's function? Because what we don't want is, differences in the way they are operating. We need some sort of uniformity. So what is your suggestion or your opinion in terms of some sort of code of ethics or code of conducts which the SROs can develop? And what role can government play? I mean, of course, these are independent regulatory bodies, but is there a role government wants to play? Even otherwise, in your opinion, what could be a standard which can then be implemented across the SROs?
Yeah, so the regulations that were published as the draft regulations did talk of an SRO being created. And an SRO being created means SROs being created depending upon the demand and the ability of people to come together to form SROs. Naturally, if there is more than one SRO in the ecosystem, there has to be harmonization, and to that an extent, the rules that are being framed and possibly a notification that may also come. So maybe together the whole rule ecosystem will definitely ensure a harmonized way of working of the whole self-regulating, I should say, organizations. So the code of conduct will always be there. And beyond this, see, it's an evolving thing, and that's why maybe it is is possible that maybe we keep the rule light and we try to work through the notification route to ensure the uniformity across such, I should say, SRO or SRBs, and of course, a reasonable time for them to get approved. So to that extent, we will be stretching our intermediaries rules or IT Act provisions to be able to do that. And our experience so far had been that wherever the industry demand was there, particularly say, for example, in case of OTT platforms, the audio-visual on-demand platforms, there was no hue and cry there. Whether legally permitted, I'll say, I mean, within quotes, unquotes, but the fact remains that if a logical system is developed, industry is already wanting for it, then it goes, I mean, it goes well within the system, and no hue and cry were raised or hopefully will be raised here also. As long as the government remains fair, which I can promise you, I mean, we are trying our best to remain as much as fair as possible, and to cast and to maybe put such kind of onus so as to ensure, once again, the user safety, the verification of users, the transparency in terms of, I mean, what is considered as a permissible game or a not permissible game. Once again, I'm avoiding the word skill or chance, but definitely, I mean, permissible game and a non-permissible game. And maybe we have already conveyed in the draft that a no bot certification, and wherever there is a random number generator in the code, that a random number generation certificate. So once again, trying to create a balanced ecosystem, and of course the rest is a matter of, I should say, only the time will tell as to how exactly the whole ecosystem evolves. I'm sure
learnings will also come in. So in fact, after, because once the rules are implemented,
particularly this ministry is, while we may be good in cybersecurity, while we may be good in maybe privacy and technical facilitation, content is actually not our cup of tea. SROs we have never made, so there can be hiccups here and there, but then as long as, at least my own experience as I mean, working in cyber law and working with the agencies, because I have dealt with 69A process, I have dealt with the rule making process, I have dealt with large number of court cases, and of course day-to-day policy initiatives and clarifications. As long as we think logical, it gets accepted with everyone, with every stakeholder, and that's the spirit. I think way forward also it should happen.
and sir, also you spoke about the RNG certificate. I think it will be good to have maybe a body, maybe an independent body which certifies, and maybe the government can also come in and play a role there.
So one more thing I'd like to convey. I mean, we did some apprehensions about the casual games being also regulated. So maybe majority of them shall not be regulated as far as casual games are concerned. So that was abundantly made clear in the rules also, I mean the draft rules also, now also. So focus is where the harm is.
Gowree, I'd like to come to you, and I think this is an issue which we discussed. You will also want to sort of come up with. In the budget, we recently saw that the 10,000 rupee threshold was removed, right? So the government will charge TDS on any transaction of any value, right? So what's your take on this? Number one. Number two, on the GST itself. How much percentage of GST should be levied? I mean, I'm not putting you on a spot, but if you want to come up with a figure, and Mr. Maheswari is also here, I'm sure the points can be taken up later.
Sure. So I think, So I think, if you really see that if the government is supporting, which is very clear through these rules that this sector. So in my mind, the success will also depend on the tax policy that the government adopt. That one side is supporting completely SRB model, give that kind of leeway to the to the sector, but on the revenue side, if you're not as supportive, there is a possibility that this may not succeed. I'll give you a straight example now. So imagine a taxi driver or a cab, or a auto rickshaw driver. He gets a message, right, to say that, hey, you may have been playing on so and so platform, but जब आपको पैसा आता है तो 30% कम आता है. ये इस पे देखो, right? Like some SMS, and we have not been unfortunately able to curtail these SMSs in India yet. That's what even yesterday was being discussed, right? So imagine this situation where a fly-by-night operator is trying to woo the gamers away from the platforms, which are legit platforms paying taxes, right? And therefore, this may not succeed. The industry may start losing their regular gamers. That's my worry, and I'll tell you why. Because majority of the transactions in India are micro-transactions, 300-400 per month or something like that, right? And these are the people who are technically not even within the tax bracket, so they're mentally not prepared to pay taxes, right? Even at individual level, their incomes are not that much, and then to say that you're going to lose that 30% right from first penny, it's too much. So I think somewhere I feel that Ministry of Finance should have sort of at least tried to understand how the industry works before they remove this threshold of 10,000, which was generally applicable to all the gaming. So in a way they have given clarity. If you ask me, two things have happened. They have given a clarity as to when should that TDS be applicable, because the current law was a little vague on that. So that is a good thing. But in my mind, simultaneously they should have put a certain threshold. Then only
what would be a threshold?
Threshold, see, earlier it was 10,000. If they wanted to reduce it because these are microtransactions, even then it would have probably done well. But with this, that's a problem number one. With GST, it's been a saga, last few years. Constantly we keep hearing that now GST Council will come out, but there are two issues again. What is the percentage? So thus far the industry has been paying under a residuary clause of 18%. Now they are saying 28%, so I have a big issue there also, because the same logic that the moment, because the tax will be then put on the consumer ultimately, right, somewhere along the lines. So that is my first issue on the percentage, and the second bigger issue is on what amount. So suppose what exactly is the tax on? When you say GST is on a service, the platform is rendering service worth 10 rupees when the player is putting 100 rupees. Right? So obviously you need to pay tax only on the service component of 10 rupees and not that 100 rupee, because that 90 rupee, because that 90 rupee is going to get distributed to the winner or winners, right? So then it completely illogical in my mind, and internationally also we studied the models. Wherever the gaming industry has succeeded, the above the board gaming industry has succeeded, is where the taxes have been reasonable. So in my mind, I hope one damage has been done already on the TDS side, but at least on the GST side, if it is 28% on the gross, it's a disaster. It should be 18% on the commission amount. That's my clear and straight view.
Although in the 49th GST Council meeting this wasn't brought up yet, so we don't know whether it will come also or not, but that's an important takeaway. Mr. Arora, coming to you, couple of points I just want to sort of bring in. Number one is, this is something which we've also been hearing and we've also commented on, is compliance, right? And this is something which has been discussed as for startups or early stage startups, you sort of have a graded compliance that the need to have a grievance redressal office, etc., may not be required, like a threshold similar to what we have in IT rules for social media, significant social media intermediaries. What's your take on that?
I agree. So think of it like this, that every time somebody starts up, they need to have some support, right? When you put the current draft, I think the compliance is about 3 people, right? Grievance officer, compliance officer, and a nodal officer to start with, right? For a startup, it's very impractical to have that approach, right? And also in terms of liability, I think the draft said that everything comes down to the grievance officer, right? So I think it's the organization that gets liable and not an individual. So I'm there in terms of, few tweaks here needed. I don't think 3 people only from a compliance point of view makes sense. We can do other things to make, to make sure that, somebody who's operating the business is genuine and is paying taxes and all of that. But to be putting it for mandatory 3 people to start with becomes a little difficult, I think. that's my take there. I think another point that we had in terms of revert on the, if there is an issue, somebody has to revert within 24 hours, right? So that's also one of the points, is it really feasible for somebody to revert in 24 hours with all the investigation what is needed? Maybe that's another point that we need to look at, and we need to revise it to a slightly longer time, whatever it is, or put a structure here, 24 hours first revert goes, and you have to conclude by such and such time, right? So that's another point that we had to take. Purely, so from the pedigree the level that we operate as Jagran, we have no problem with the 3 people structure, because, by God's grace, we are in a situation where even with a startup, we can afford to do that. If it is the law of the land, we'll go by it. There is no issue, but purely from the ecosystem where we want more and more people to be engaged and for a legitimate industry to grow, I think we should be a little mindful in terms of, the requirements that come in from compliance. Sir, smiling.
Mr. Maheswari is listening and smiling.
I thought let's create job opportunities for many people, but then we take up your point.
I can guarantee that this will be something good for lawyers, because the more grievance redressal officers you have, the good it's good for lawyers at least. So I think Gowree and I agree on this.
We are cognizant of the issues that you have raised, and therefore, hopefully, in the final version which you see, there should, even when we talk of SSMI, actually you can manage with 2 people. So grievance officer and the compliance officer can be the same, which we also did not realize until on the ground there were only 2 people, and it was working legally. So once again, as I said, these points we are cognizant of, will definitely be taken care of.
I think in the Publishing Act also we have 1 compliance officer that is there at the moment.
We want only 1 neck, primarily. So because that's where, accountability has to be fixed, and that too, there also, that was only on the lighter side, but otherwise, even when we asked for the chief compliance officer, we were for SSMI, the whole idea was of the compliance rather than of the individual cases of compliances. And that's why, while we stated that the person shall be personally liable, however, an opportunity of being heard has to be given first before any action is envisaged. And the same applies with respect to the gaming platforms also. And as regards timing also, so 24 hours, the whole idea was to acknowledge.
Yeah, that should happen.
Yeah.
That I agree.
So,
that nobody should feel lost in terms of have I reached as somebody listening? Yes.
And because we are already, working for creation of a grievance appellate committee, so we also envisage maybe having some role of the GAC, about to start GAC, even for the gaming platforms.
So in fact, that was my next question, and I wanted to get your perspective.
So I am able to read him.
That some sort of an appellate body over the SRO, which is a government-led or a government-initiated body which operates, because if, let's say, a user or a platform may have some complaints with the SRO, where do they go? So, which is where I was coming from.
Yeah, so maybe the answer has already been given. Once again, the rules are not yet out, so the final contents of how it will look like is not really known even to us, because it's a fast-changing scenario. So, but yes, the point has been taken, point has been well understood that there is a need in case of grievances remaining unresolved, even at the SRO level, and as to how exactly should they be dealt with. And one of the clear possibility is that you use the existing GAC model. And once again, with respect to GAC, I would like to convey that the GACs, 3 GAC, the ministry is already, the government has already constituted 3 grievance appellate committee, each having 3 members, led by the chairperson, of course, is ex officio joint secretary in 3 different ministries. But otherwise, the members have been recruited through a transparent and open process of advertisement, and so they are already in place. And we believe sometime next week, the whole GAC portal should become operational. And hopefully in time to come, when the gaming rules, in fact the intermediary rules, including on online gaming, they're out. Hopefully the GAC's scope is expanded to cover whatever materials.
That'll be very important, sir. Thank you for that. So before we sort of move to the audience, I hope there are questions. I'll do one more round very quickly. And Mr. Maheswari, I'll sort of, because we'll come back to you and then we'll go to Gowree. And this question I had for you in terms of just responsible gaming practices and user safety, and what is government thinking in terms of what is an ideal way for companies to adhere to certain principles to protect the users. Of course, a lot has already been given the provisions for the SROs. And what is your message? Let's say if there's a platform for you to communicate to the industry as well, what would you want the industry to do with respect to imbibing some of these principal gaming practices to make sure user safety is paramount?
Follow the best practices. There is nothing, see, once again, let's look at the grievances that we receive. That people have been, in fact, cheated, they have lost all their money. Maybe they have taken loan immediately at the time when they are playing. So naturally, one major aspect will therefore be the KYC itself, which will be the user identity being known, and of course, with some limitation on money. The next bigger problem is about the addictiveness, and maybe through the SROs and through the code of commitment, we will try to see this part as well. The other thing, of course, is about the bias being there, and therefore, if there is a skewness in a platform, it is some people who will always win vis-a-vis others. Therefore, so all those aspects through the code of commitment at SRO level and in the process of verification or in the process of registration of such games, maybe these aspects will be taken care of. And of course, I strongly believe that if there are more than one SROs, the competition also will keep them maybe at toes to be able to perform at their best, and the grievance appellate committee or some such similar system of grievance handling will ensure that they are also not able to do, beyond what is considered as reasonable and fair.
Fair enough, sir. Gowree, coming to you, a lot has been discussed in terms of the rules, really stepping stone in terms of regulating the gaming sector. But at the same time, there are debates that it doesn't look at skill versus chance, or what sir was talking about, permissible versus non-permissible. So do you think the rules in the current shape, or whenever the new shape comes, or whatever the shape they will be notified, are adequate in terms of dealing with the industry right now? Or do you see that this will be further evolved in some sort of an overall law? And a lot of discussion is going around a new Digital India Act. Maybe there could be some provisions over there. So from a regulatory standpoint, the idea is to avoid litigation at the state level, and by empowering the SROs to register games of skill or permissible games, how do we ensure that states don't start going in a different regulatory direction?
Sure. So I think I see these rules more as a stepping stone to a full-fledged law, because this is not solving the state-by-state issue at all, right? Because I don't see this as a legislation which is overriding the state law, right? So if some states want to ban even a skill game which they have been doing, that will continue. Right, so you need to definitely, because if you really see, there are court judgments which have recognized that even skill gaming can fall within the state list under certain provisions. So there is that constitutional debate, but at the same time, under constitution there are tools available where those tools were used even for the Prize Competition Act, which was enacted, which is a central law, right? So such tools should be used over a period of time, where essentially you just have a central law that basically is applicable throughout the country, at least for online games. Insofar as physical gaming is concerned in your hotels or whatever, that of course can be left at the state law, right? So that's my personal view. I've written extensively about it on this. Second, the reason for that, sir, right at the inception mentioned about the foreign websites. Today, of course, some tools are being used to block them and all of that. But if you really see from a quote-unquote enforcement mechanism is concerned, the state law doesn't have extraterritorial jurisdiction, right? So unless you have a central law, that extraterritorial jurisdiction in terms of enforcement, see today you're only blocking, right? But if you were to go enforce or, basically really take some specific action, that is not possible. And today also, in my mind, there is still a doubt whether the blocking has been appropriately done under 69A or not, right? Because MeitY has originally taken a stand that it doesn't fall under, public order issue some years back. Of course, the interpretation can change over a period of time, but in my personal view, 69A is not an appropriate place to block it. So you definitely need a central law which takes care of all of this. Whether under a Digital India Act or an independent law, we'll need to wait and watch.
Will that also look at, in terms of an overall law, which then comes up with certain principles and designs for regulation?
This is what we have today is, as I said, a good blueprint, a beta version. So the same rules can get subsumed, like the SRB, the mechanism and everything. The good intent is all there, but you need a central law.
Yeah, I think again, the way it plays out in the next 2 years, 3 years, we really inform the sector in terms of what's working, what's not working. I think how SROs will perform their due diligence in terms of registering games will be very important, because that will also inform the legal and policy debates and the jurisprudence at large in terms of, okay, why is a particular game permissible? Why is a particular game not permissible? What are the metrics which have been calculated? What are the objective tests which have been calculated? So I think all those things in terms of the literature which will be produced can become sort of a background for a new law eventually, if at all, whenever that happens.
I agree with you, see, because ultimately if you see the Indian construct, right, and I'm speaking this upfront here, that I don't think any government will say, okay, I'm legalizing gambling, quote-unquote, games of chances. It's very difficult. So if you have to stay within the skill gaming, if that is your mandate for next several years, you need to have that robust mechanism to include all of that what you said, and that today unfortunately is not there.
I think the rules will initiate that process. Mr. Arora, your take on these aspects before we open the
Absolutely.
discussion.
So for us, I think that the SROs need a little bit more in terms of absolute clarity. There has to be a black and white structure around permissible game formats, KYC, user security, and all of that, right? Only when the SROs become clear, and then the OGIs kind of work with them or try and get themselves whitelisted, they'll have a guideline to go by. So that's my only thing, just make it easier for SRBs, more transparent, whatever. See, nobody can go against the law of the land. So whatever you put there is going to be there, like it, don't like it, possible, not possible, it is going to be there. So just make it more transparent, and an absolute black and white is what we would require in terms of clarity. That's it. Thank you.
So you wanted to, okay. Yeah, okay. So I think we have some time. Do we have some time for a quick audience Q&A? If there are any questions, we'll be happy to take up. But I think we have 5 minutes we can manage. So, yes, you have a question. Maybe somebody can provide a mic because I can't hear.
Hi, am I audible? Yeah. So I actually had a question about So there are increasingly we've seen casual games and mid-core games and even some hardcore games, particularly the ones that are massively multiplayer online and role-playing games where there is an element of deposit and there is an element of in-game rewards. And these are not necessarily what I would call a real money game, but these are games which follow the more traditional sense of casual or mid-core games, and it's more akin to what the games are in the global industry. And my question is whether those would sort of be also within the ambit of these rules, because you do make a deposit, and you might be making a deposit for cosmetic reasons or for gaming experience reasons or for unlocking playable characters, and you might be getting rewards within the game, which are things like cosmetic rewards, which are things like special dances, which are things like special settings, which do get covered. I mean, I'm not a lawyer, but which do get covered from my very basic understanding of the language and the law. And this is a model which globally the gaming industry is increasingly going towards, wherein they provide the game for free, and then you enter the ecosystem, and then there is an in-game currency, and there are various experiences, and players can have their own experience depending on how much they invest into the game, both in terms of time and in terms of resources. So, seeing that this is a major trend in the gaming industry globally, I wanted to understand whether these laws might disincentivize Indian developers from embracing this, or even foreign developers from propagating this model in India.
Gowree, Mr. Mishra.
So once again, I'll just say that please wait for maybe 2 more weeks.
Absolutely, sir.
But the fact also remains, because the rules have still not been casted in stone. As to what is your recommendation on this?
My recommendation, sir? So I don't have one at this point.
I think IAMAI must have submitted the recommendation.
Yeah, that's not my recommendation. That's IAMAI.
See, for that reason, it's not just, I'm not just talking about you or IAMAI in particular, because if you can talk on behalf of industry and the trends that you are seeing in the industry, maybe the expectation can also be cast. And that's where, at least as government, maybe we should be willing to listen.
Absolutely, sir.
And in any case, I'll also like to convey what Madam has already conveyed, that this is sort of a beta kind of a position.
Absolutely.
Finally, the solution lies in the central law. One, two, the fact that this ministry has been able to bring in the amendments so fast. So therefore, if things don't really work the way the intention is, we remain open to amendments as well.
Understood, sir.
But at any given time, whatever is the rule, as Gaurav mentioned, will be the law of the land, and it has to be followed.
Absolutely, sir.
If I may just add, I think the way I look at it, I'm not going by the pure wording, but there should be a correlation between what I'm staking or putting in and what that table, winner is taking away, right? What you're explaining is one-to-one, where I'm sort of, having my own journey in terms of the gameplay, where I'm buying the skills and this, that, and the other, right? But at the same time, there are internationally, if you see the loot boxes and all those concepts, right? Different, as sir mentioned, different type of harms could be contemplated.
Absolutely.
So what we need to really focus on is there a harm, if at all, in whichever format that is evolving? As I said, right up front, it's innovative industry. So you will every day have something new. So it will be for the SRBs, in my mind, if you ask me, to keep, because it's not government's job to, be in your room and figuring out what is happening. It is for SRBs to figure out what is the industry working on, identify the harms, and then work with the government. That's an ideal model to say that, these are the new models, these are the harms, possible harms, loot boxes, that internationally, this is what we have noticed, these are, international reports. Let's amend the rules, or let's amend our self-regulation to regulate this harm. That is the healthy way forward in my mind, rather than just saying that, like leave out casual games or leave out this or leave out that, right? So it's more of that internationally, there are age rating, age gating, all these things in my mind for a healthy industry are required.
Thank you very much.
I think it's very clear. I think it's also very encouraging to see that the government will be open to new ideas because this industry is moving so fast. So I think what works today, 2 years later, we may need a tweak here and there.
Absolutely.
You know? And these kind of questions, these kind of debates will be critical, even to inform the government and other stakeholders that look, there are new avenues coming up. And I think that's what the government is also doing. You know, we are looking at a new IT Act, which is after more than 20 years, because they're also looking at new age business models, different type of industries coming up, new harms coming up. So you have to reinvent the wheel again. So I think, I'm sure in the gaming sector also we should see that.
So if I can ask a tangential follow-up question, speaking of the new IT Act or the Digital India Act, which we've all been hearing about, what would the implications of that be of, the regulatory ecosystem that has been built around the current IT Act, whether it be the multiple SROs, whether it be the GSE, will they be subsumed into the new rules, or are we, looking at taking a fresh look at how the Digital India Act will be built? Are we going with a clean slate?
I think pretty much subsuming the existing rules, because the homework has been done for this, a lot of consultations have been done, a lot of thinking has gone ahead. I think these will be taken up, maybe improved a little bit more, evolved a little bit more here and there. But if we also look at, Yash, how IT rules have been amended continuously, we were just discussing this previously a few minutes ago. We saw the amendments in February 21.
Yeah.
Then we saw another round of amendment in June 2022. Then we saw 2 more amendments coming. So we've seen 4 amendments in the last 2 years now, which demonstrates that the government is continuously looking to evaluate, evolve the law based on current realities. So I'm sure that same thinking will be applied.
The life of a government servant is going to be tough, is tough.
Thank you, sir. I think point taken. That's it from me.
Great. Any further questions? Any queries from anyone? I think we are good. So I think.
On this note, I think we can wrap up this session. Thank you for an inspiring session. I would like to thank all our esteemed panelists and moderator for taking out time and coming here. Can we have a quick photograph of the panelists together?
I just want to compliment IAMAI on 2-3 things. One, you refused to print the agenda, so you saved paper. You're not unnecessarily giving any mementos and all of that, and saving the environment. So I really want to compliment your organizers.
Thank you, ma'am. The day's proceedings come to an end. We would like to thank our associate partner, Google and Message, growth partner, Paytm Ads, lanyard partner, Kalera, conversation media partner, Bobble AI, agenda partner, Disney and Hotstar, track partner, TCI, digital transformation partner, Accenture India, digital media partner, Jagran New India, silver partners, CleverTap and AWS, bronze partner, Hexa Webini, Mool One, Exotel, Notify Visitors, Pay, Sprint, True Balance and Conversations partner, Value First. Finally, I would like to express my gratitude on behalf of IAMAI for your attendance, participation and cooperation in making this event a success. Thank you.